Satan interviewing. You know that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all Ruby up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
What's up?
Happy Thursday.
Dude.
It still feels weird for me to record on a Thursday and not a Friday. You really gotta mess my life up.
It's Friday in Australia? Not yet. Almost.
It has forced me to feel like today is Friday, and it is not, which is a problem.
It
Because if I have two Fridays in a row, we're going to have real issues.
I mean, you could just take work off every Friday. I approve it.
Thank you, Chris.
Doesn't have to be crazy at work.
And it doesn't have to be.
Oh, man. What's up with you guys?
A million things and nothing at all.
Have you upgraded to RC1 of Rails 7.2 for production yet?
Of course not.
I have not.
For shame.
I read your email, though.
A rate limit feature is like chef's kiss. I don't know why it's taken so long. Funnily enough, like looking at the PR and stuff for it, it's like such a simple feature. And it's like, man, we could have had this a long time ago. But I've been using rack attack for throttling or rate limiting. One less dependency, always a win in my book.
And rack attack do be attacking me sometimes. So honestly,
it's one of those gems that's really good and battle tested, but because it lives in rack, its interface is not friendly. And I always had a hard time like reading through the docs and copying an example every single time. And then you look at the Rails implementation rate limit to 10 requests in 3 minutes and you're done. And it's like, dang, that reads really nicely. I feel like that's the big superpower of Rails, the wording. The syntax of Ruby makes it so you can just have really elegantly written logic like that. My mom, who doesn't know how to code, could absolutely go in and change that if I asked her to. Like, how wild is that?
That's pretty wild because you said that, and the first thing that popped in my brain was when I went home for last Christmas and my mom pulled out a book and she put it on the counter and she said, if we ever died, these are all our passwords. I think I had like an actual heart attack and I've pushed them. So when you're like, my mom could do this, I'm like, well.
Somebody was talking the other day about actually that's really secure because the people trying to get her passwords are probably not people who have access to that book easily.
Right. But when you have used similar passwords over the years and you're storing them all in a book, those could have been like leaked already or compromised and you would have no idea.
Well, I can't help it that she doesn't come up with unique passwords to write down in the book. But
yes, I thought about putting them on 1Password, but I also would like to lay on the couch and enjoy my Christmas break. So
have you thought about leaking them online?
No.
It's just photos of Post-it notes.
Honestly.
And someone has to OCR them.
You won't.
No, I will not.
How would you make a manual physical password generator? I'm imagining some sort of like flip book thing. You like flip it really fast and
no. You know those things in Dune, the worm collars?
Mm-hmm.
I would use that. Pick up the reverberations of the earth, and that's my password. I have to like thump the sand the right way.
I'd like to see you make that.
I need y'all to tell me that this is a bad idea and I should not do this. And that
this is a bad idea and you should not do it.
Cool. All right. Well, have y'all heard of mise? MISE?
Yeah, I use it now.
I've been eyeing
fast.
it. Tell me about it.
I've been using asdf for quite some time.
Same.
And oh my God, it's crazy slow compared to mise. Because mise doesn't inject anything into your shell.
That's what I was reading.
I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really looked into how it works when it like changes directories or whatever. But it basically adds the correct version of Ruby or Node or whatever to your path. So it's like instant lookup instead of like going through shim, and bash is kind of slow and doing all that nonsense that ASDF does. I don't know how it compares to like RBM or chruby or whatever.
I think ASDF is better than the others, although some of them use the same things. And I've always heard that chruby is like a standalone and has its own great situation going on.
And my problem with all those that just do Ruby is like, well, I also need Node or other languages sometimes. So it's like using any tool that can do more than one language is ideal. Also, mise uses like a mise.toml file. It has the RBM vars feature of in this directory, and all the parent directories will go load environment variables. That's built into mise as well. And you can like do more configuration because it's a toml file. So it's actually like parsable and being able to grab keys and stuff out of it. So it ticks all the boxes for me. It is super nice. I just tried it out because I'd heard several people talk about it the same. And then I saw Omokube uses mise now. And I was like, yeah, why not try it locally on my desktop? I can always go back to asdf. And then it was so fast that I was like, all right, now my laptop's on mise and everything else is going to be mise going forward. It is excellent.
I assume the migration is relatively easy because if I remember correctly from reading their docs, they have the ability to basically fall back to using the ASDF plugins. They have their own versions, but you can also use the ASDF ones as well.
Yeah, and I haven't had the need for any of those yet because all the languages I've installed are like the officially supported ones. And then if you want to switch, literally the only thing you have to do is comment out the ASDF lines in your bash RC or ZSH RC, whatever your shell is, so that ASDF does not add itself to the path and put its shims directory in the path. Then mise will be able to be first. You could have both.
You don't want both.
You don't really want to.
Here's what I want you to tell me, and you don't have to tell me right now. You can tell me later. I want to know what happens if you use the shebang user bin env Ruby and then execute the file, which Ruby it uses.
It should be whatever's first in the path. So that shouldn't be an issue.
Python is causing me great distress in that area, but not related to my decision to move over. But if it did work like that, it would be really nice because I've been Googling, like, how do I convince Python that it's actually using Homebrew? And everyone's like, don't do it. It's a huge mistake.
Yeah, I just did user bin env Ruby -v and it did Ruby 334.
Nice.
So, and what's cool is like it's also installed in your home directory and under .local, which is kind of like the standard way of doing things for
Instead of
stuff. And no shims, which makes it really fast. The only thing that I've run into is like when you install Ruby for the first time and try to run bundler or something, or like gem install Rails, I've had to like reload my shell so that the Rails or bundler or whatever executables were detected. And that was like the only thing that I ran into as an issue so far. I was like, it could have been more seamless. And I just didn't look into like, I don't know if there's a mise reshim command
like
equivalent.
I was reading their Ruby source file and they have like a few commands similar to some of these other ones that they try to like inject into the global.
Mise doctor will check for installation issues with it. And that's something that I always liked about Homebrew. And it's just cool to have a tool with all that functionality built in that you can look at all your plugins and mise self-update will update mise. You don't have to remember the git clone command or whatever it is for ASDF. And all those things seem awfully easy. It'll also look for the mise.toml file for your languages and versions, but also you can have the legacy.ruby version, .node version.
It would use the tool versions file as well if it found one.
Yeah, which makes it pretty seamless.
And I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think I still use .ruby version and .node version just in case somebody's not using a tool that can manage both, like ASDF. So it's almost a little redundant to have both in there, but it's great. I've not run into any complaints, no frustrations with it. It's just super slick. And to have like the environment variable stuff built in is awesome because we use that all the time. And I tried to convince the ASDF maintainers to just add that little plugin. And they're like, why would you want a plugin that doesn't just install a language? What is this for? Why would you want this? And I explained it. This is why it's useful. And they like still didn't quite understand and didn't merge it. So I have a fork of ASDF that I run just to add that feature. And it's like, well, we could get rid of all that if we switch to mise. So I probably will switch everything over to mise going forward. It's great.
Be a good Go Rails video, whichever one of your minions hasn't done it yet.
There you go. Yeah. We should definitely do that. I hadn't even considered that.
Because I
That's been-
like use Postgres and Redis with it too. So I'm not willing to just try it and hope it works without having like time to go back in case. But sounds like you've convinced me to do this, even though I didn't want to.
Yeah, I'm curious if you do run Postgres with it using the ASDF Postgres or backend plugin. It should all work, I would think.
Should. I don't think they have an official Postgres thing. I think they're using ASDF's Postgres. So I'm assuming that will be a big deal. And I guess to be fair, I did just nuke my database and I could also just make a backup of it, I guess, if I need.
Yeah. We were just playing with the dev containers in Rails 7.2. And it's so cool. The way that they've changed it so it's now a command instead of included in Rails new. So you can apply it to existing apps and it'll go analyze your database YAML and stuff. And then it uses Docker Compose. So you get a Postgres, Redis, Selenium, MySQL container running in Docker. You might have an old project and then Podia is running the latest Postgres. Your old project's running Postgres 12 or something. And you can just use Docker Compose automatically. You don't even have to know anything about Docker Compose, because it generates it all for you. Pretty sweet. I really just wish that there was like dev container functionality that you could add to Vim or other non-VS Code things. I haven't really looked in depth to see if that's like possible.
The main point though, for the dev container, it's a Microsoft thing. So that being said, the whole point is for you to be able to like use it remotely. So that's why I was so happy that they've added this. I've tried to write my own one time and got annoyed with it. And I've tried to convince other people to do it as well for workshops and stuff at conferences, because someone could open this on their phone or iPad if they needed to, like if it has a dev container. So it's a great addition.
I've got a little project I need to deploy, but consider this. You are brand new to Rails and Ruby, never used it before. And you don't want to have to go through compiling Ruby from scratch and all that nonsense and brew install Postgres and yada, yada. So dev containers don't save your ass right now because you have to already have Rails installed to run Rails new to get the dev container. I built a prototype after talking to Andrew from Shopify about this at RailsConf. What if we have a little website that runs and generates a Rails app for you, adds it to your GitHub, and then just creates the repository with all the files there. So then you're on Windows, you can download VS Code and Docker, and then clone your repository and just run it in dev containers, never installing Postgres, Ruby, Rails, libvips, nothing. You just have a perfectly functional environment immediately, because all we have to do is create the Rails app on your GitHub. But you can also use GitHub Codespaces, which just run in the cloud, so you can edit on your phone or your iPad or whatever you want as well. So
you can also edit Codespaces in VS Code on your desktop without having it locally,
which is awesome.
Yes.
Because then you just need the editor locally, and then your actual development is all happening in the cloud or on your desktop or server at home or something. It doesn't really care where it's at. That's like the real stuff that makes VS Code so appealing compared to just a regular text editor that's like, well, you know, I can SSH in and run Vim on another machine, but it's not as flexible doing that from your browser. Have fun. SSH keys and all that other stuff you got to sort of set up. But like VS Code is just impressive what they've ended up doing with it. I like it a lot. Except those dang Vim bindings need to be a bit more accurate.
I don't want to talk about that right now.
I did the nvim stuff, but then I also installed lazy Vim. I think that has messed it up because I'll like hit a key now and it duplicates lines and it's not supposed to. I'm just doing like regular stuff and it's messed up. So
there's a condition you have to add in your lazy Vim config to like, don't load this stuff when VS Code. Load this stuff with VS Code. You don't want any of your plugins to like be loaded It's using all
So I
your
need
key
to go-
bindings, all your settings, all your options that don't affect VS Code.
I need to go check that out then, because lazy Vim and lazy Git and stuff are really awesome. If you want to start with that stuff, I feel like that's a great way to have a very friendly version of Vim or even Git command line stuff. It just seems like really awesome. I don't know when they started, but it reminded me a lot of the old Janus distribution from GitHub or somebody who had put that together for Vim back in the day.
So we're talking about lazy.mvim, the plugin manager, but there's something called lazy neovim, which is a distribution of like plugins packaged with lazy Vim. But that conglomerate of things that it installs with itself has code in it for doing stuff with VS Code. And that's where I learned how to do it. If you read on the NeoVim VS Code docs, they tell you that you can do this because it's basically just like a .files config, but one that you can install. So you can go in there and read what they do with it and see kind of how they do it.
I still haven't learned all the shortcuts and other stuff for it, so I'm still using my regular Vim setup. But one of these days, I just need to commit, go read the docs a little bit more, and pull the trigger and just stick with it. Because it seems like it's just so much more user-friendly and more visual too, which is cool. Because I think similar to that, I've used HTOP on Linux to see processes and RAM and CPU, but I think Toby from Shopify was running BTOP in a tweet, and I was like, what is this?
There's a lot of tops out there. Or you can just run top. So
because I saw that and I was like, dang, this is pretty and way more easy to see what's going on and whatever. And lots of impressive work that's being done on these tools. Command line tools are still getting better and better. You normally think of command line tools as like, oh, it's just text and it's going to be a pain in the butt to use. And now they're like super visual, and you can still click on stuff with your mouse in some of these, which is wild, and it's cool.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with command line tools. Like, I just collect them. I would be on that show Hoarders, but it would just be like bookmarks of random tools I found on the internet.
They open your front door and it's just boxes and boxes of command line tools printed
Just
out.
CD-ROMs everywhere.
And passwords.
Yeah, and the passwords.
So you guys have upgraded Rails in the past. Like, what's your timeline to go to 7.2? Is that hopefully soon, or gonna wait until
I feel like it?
Yeah, probably wise to wait until like 7.2.1. I actually realized that when a new Ubuntu release comes out, like the LTS versions, it doesn't automatically allow you to upgrade. To upgrade, you have to wait until the first point release, which I thought was like a really nice safety thing to build in, where it's like anybody that wants to run this day one, grab the ISO and use it right away. But if you're upgrading a machine that's in production, we want you to wait until the first point release. And I was like, dang, that's smart.
Yeah, there's a flag called greedy when you're upgrading brew casks and brew formula that I can't remember exactly what it does, but it's basically like, oh, well, normally we wouldn't have upgraded, but since you asked.
Interesting. I think there's something similar for the upgrade stuff on apt or whatever, and the do release upgrade on Ubuntu and stuff. I always thought that was cool. But then also at the same time, like you see Shopify and Basecamp and other companies running Rails main, and they have more resources to, like, if we found an issue in Rails main, we'll go fix it right away because we work on Rails all the time. So they have a bit more freedom to go and do that. But it's like, what do you do as a small team that has products and features to ship and not necessarily that much time to contribute to Rails itself? A different balance or whatever.
Until now, observability was metrics, logs, and traces. It was reliability budgets, error rates, and latencies. It was big acronyms on a central dashboard. In short, it was what the ops team cared about, not the developers. But Honeybadger is changing that. Of course, you need the big picture, the single pane of glass that lets you know what your system is doing and that it's operating normally. But individual users matter too. User experience is more than just a line on a dashboard. Honeybadger's observability platform lets you drill down into the details, into the individual user experiences that drive product development and your business forward. It helps you understand your product and your users as much as it does your systems and performance. Honeybadger's free developer plan includes error tracking, uptime monitoring, custom charts and dashboards, and 50 megabytes per day of structured event logging. To get started, visit honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io.
Okay, I'm going to come at this from a completely different angle. It does not make sense financially for me to run our tests on a version of Rails we run in production and the main branch of Rails. I'm not watching like our CI bill at Pody or anything, but whenever I'm working on like our CI suite, that's the thing I'm always looking at is like, how do I drop the cost of this?
Yeah.
And if we have to run it twice, basically, double the time, double the amount of workers that won't be available when other PRs are pushed up, more and more time that things are waited to get pushed up into production.
Yeah, a lot of our stuff is open source that we test against Rails 7.2 ahead of time or Rails 8 or whatever. And we get free CI minutes for all those. And then our applications themselves are more or less like Jumpstart will have one branch that's testing against main monthly or not that often merge in. Because if we're like Rails 8 right now, that's not coming out for a while. So at least we're getting involved ahead of time and okay, this thing's going to break in the future. We can start making changes today that will make that an easy upgrade in the future. But that's a great point. We don't really use it where it's continuously running against the next version and the current version. It's more of a periodic, but also still ongoing process.
In my experience, there's always at least one gem that prevents you from actually upgrading or like fully being able to totally get there. So in my mind, it's like, is it even worth the time just to like rustle through all these like bundler issues?
Right.
It would be so nice if you could run a command that would scan your gem file and be like, oh, people reported that this gem version has issues with this version of Rails.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
And that's kind of like where we come into play, where like we have the opportunity because we're building Jumpstart for everyone. Hopefully we're the ones that fix that gem for you ahead of time. And the benefit you get is you just wait and then it's magically fixed before the release comes out or shortly after, which is the same thing as wait until the first point release, because almost certainly then all of those gems that did have issues, someone's hopefully looked at it and fixed it and addressed whatever issue it was that wasn't compatible or whatever. Yesterday actually brings up a good little thing. The Jumpstart Rails app has a little Jumpstart Rails engine that manages the configuration that lives in your app. And we're including some of the application helpers in that Rails engine from the parent app. And there was apparently, if you install a couple of these random gems, it would blow up the boot process. And it was triggered because our engine was applying some helpers from the Rails application, which didn't make any sense. And it turns out that all of those gems that were causing issues were ones that were written incorrectly. So their Railtie or Rails engine was force loading action controller really early in the boot process during the Railties initializing. And so that was causing this other thing to break of ours, which was done just fine. It wasn't really an issue, except because these gems were kind of written incorrectly. So I've been slowly, whenever we find these gems, go submit a PR. And it's like, hey, use the lazy load hooks and inject your stuff into the Rails action controller or active record when the callback is run. Don't force load that during the Railtie initializer. And I'm doing my good deeds of like trying to slowly fix these things around the ecosystem. But there's a lot of them. And it's one of those things that people are writing the gems, trying to extend Rails and add features. But, you know, even though it's in the guides, doesn't mean people are going to do it the right way. Maybe there just needs to be placeholders or like comments in the Railtie or Rails engine that show you, hey, if you want to extend active record, uncomment this and add your code to include the module here. So maybe that'll be something I submit or whatever to Rails, because I feel like Railties and engines and plugins in general are very hard to document because you actually need to know a fair bit of the Rails internals like this stuff to make sure that, oh, I don't break how constants are loaded. That is hard to document. And then it's like, if we just gave you little hints and teasers in the right place, might be able to save a lot of trouble in the long run. And I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about dev containers. I don't think I've finished it. I've got a PR that I was working on to add the dev container functionality. So you can run that command for a Railtie or Rails engine. And then if you're building Pay or Notice or something, we can have the Docker Compose set up with Postgres or MySQL or both and run the development of your Railties and plugins and engines in your dev containers, which is generally the hardest part. All of our gems, we've got to run against SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, 4 or 5 different Rails versions, 4 or 5 different Ruby versions as well. And the matrix of like CI permutations ends up pretty darn long, which thank goodness open source is free minutes on GitHub Actions because, man, we'd be burning through some dollars real fast with that.
It can become a real nightmare if you're not careful. Once you start parallelizing stuff and then you start parallelizing that stuff and then suddenly you're parallels deep into the matrix.
And then debugging that stuff if there's any global variables or something that are getting screwed up. And
yeah, the default timeout on GitHub Actions is way too long. So for what it's worth, anyone listening to this who's like, oh, GitHub Actions, blah, 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 I would suggest you dropping the timeout on almost every single job down to like 5 minutes or less, depending on your
smart
numbers or whatever. But I've caught a bunch of stuff that was running over for no reason. And we had a timeout on it that was lower than the GitHub set one, but I was like, I need to drop this even lower because running migrations should never run more than 5 minutes. And if it does, then there's a problem.
Can't you configure it to like fail early? Like it will kill the other running ones if one of them dies or fails? Because that's another thing that can eat up more costs. You know, the whole CI suite is going to fail because one failed, but it just continues running all the other ones. I don't know if this is always a thing, but at least now you can say rerun only the failed jobs, which is going to save you a lot of time and money.
As long as it reruns the right things. I choose to believe it does, Jason.
Did it the other day.
I choose to believe.
You got to go set it up right.
Jason's trampling on my beliefs right now.
Do you choose to believe it so that if the tests are failing, you don't have to make them pass right now and it can go ahead and merge?
Choose to believe it because in theory, it should be running the same seed. In theory, according to the documentation, it should actually work that way, and it doesn't.
This is why people choose to not read the docs.
Yes, but I had.
Do you have to configure that to run the same seed? I hadn't thought of that.
We're doing things a little bit more complicated than.
That's why it doesn't work.
Well,
boom, roasted.
Kind of. He's not wrong, technically. Technically, that is why it doesn't work. But it just has to do with parallelization. And like, if you're running some tests on one container and some tests on, like, if you're parallelizing that across several containers and one of the containers fails and you rerun those tests, however it does the logic to choose what files it parallelizes in that run, it needs to do the exact same over again instead of like rerunning that logic, which is what I think is happening. So what I think is happening is that when we hit rerun, it reruns the logic to choose what files to parallelize together instead of like rerunning the exact same seed that it should be.
It's problematic, but until I know for sure, the only way I can trust it is just to rerun all of them.
Well, considering the majority of the ones that cause that issue are flaky, you could argue the solution is just to delete the test.
Well, I mean, I have been recently.
Good. Thank you. Now I have permission.
Okay.
Boom.
Saw Jason do it. I will never say that you gave me permission. I'll say that I saw Jason do it and thought it was implied. Yeah, Jamie's never going to listen to this.
Yeah, this is fine. It's whatever. My takeaway is just to not test.
Yeah, I was going to say the safest and cheapest option is to not run tests.
You're not wrong.
Well, maybe not the safest, but...
Well, safe for who? Because I would feel a lot safer if I didn't have to spend half of the time I spend writing a feature writing tests for it, if not more.
I mean, Honeybadger is going to catch the errors anyways. So
and that's true. So really, And I can
Exactly.
SSH into the box
Paul-
from my phone. So
Paul doesn't even have to inject the ad. We're done.
You just got
Honeybadger's new slogan: "Don't write tests, let us catch the problems."
yeah, just catch it live. Why are you scared or something?
And we just lost our sponsorship.
Well, to be fair, they're
Love
probably there's a lot of errors coming from this call right now, probably.
test in production. That's the answer.
Or
Okay.
or you just have a QA person.
Let's talk about tests. If we're going
Wow.
to talk about it, let's talk.
Do we
about,
even have enough time to start this conversation?
I don't know
I've
if I'm.
got- No, give
Do
me.
you have 4 hours available?
He's got 10
Well-
minutes to drop some heat.
All right.
Listen, this might be a quick conversation. You might be like, "You're a dumbass," and we're done. I'm going to put my coworker and I on blast. Mario and I have been writing.
Don't be talking shit about Mario.
I ain't talking shit. I just said we have this agenda we're trying to push right now because we use RSpec at old Podia. We are trying to use no lets and no subjects and as few describes and context as possible, which has led to some repeated test setup. But what it has led to also is being able to go to a test and literally just look at a single test and read all the way through it and know how it's set up.
Welcome to how you write minitest tests.
That's what spurred all this.
RSpec gives you so many tools and you think you need to use them. And that's been my experience is you have let and you have describe blocks and you have all these features you can use. So then your tendency is I probably should be using them. And it makes your test suite not as readable in my experience because actually this thing was set way over here and I can not even find it because it's not even remotely close to where my test is and the groupings and context around it.
That's my whole reason. And I wrote a lot of these, don't get me wrong. I'm so like exhausted from going to a test file, being on line 491 and having to scroll to line 1 to see how this test is set up. My mentality when writing RSpec tests has always been do not repeat, just share as much and just change this one let if you need to. In job boards, they use minitest. And oh Lord, Andrew rolled his eyes. You ready for this? I use fixtures in job boardly too.
Bow, bow, bow.
I just watched Andrew literally vomit on his floor.
That's the way to do it. I like it.
Yeah,
Having done the same thing so many years with RSpec and everything, like I switched to minitest and repeating stuff in tests, I have zero issue with. If each of the tests are independent and something changes for this one case, I can go change that one test instead of having to rewrite the shared examples that need now this one exception in them.
Shared
and stuff.
Now,
examples.
pump. All right, I
Yeah,
gotta
shared
pump the
examples.
brakes.
Oh.
Pump the brakes.
Sh-
Pump the brakes. I
Shared
got.
examples are my trigger.
I do not
Hannah-
believe in using shared examples. I never use shared examples, but
My
I
man.
love RSpec. I totally am
Wrong.
down with not using
Well-
let. You don't have to use let at all, but you're taking describe and context off my dead body.
You
I
can
think
use
a
that
lot of
mini
the-
test.
If you add
Yeah.
minitest spec, and I'm not going back to minitest spec, brother.
You can also define classes and stuff inside of your test classes to get that sort of
I'm
like
fully aware.
same
but you
thing
think
without
that's better?
having extra mini test things.
That's just a
It's
bunch
not-
of more
I don't-
code you have to write.
I don't think the benefit of having the like describe text in the test suite output saves me that much trouble because like it combines the context and the describe strings and
It's
puts
not
that
for
out.
reading, it's for writing, brother.
The only place you're going to see that is in the output where it's all combined together. So it's like,
So when you
and then
read
the-
the test
it
code,
doesn't really matter because the only thing I want to see is the
Oh, I see
line
what
of the
you're saying.
test that failed and jump straight to that and figure it out there.
I'm with Andrew. I do like being able, even if I just use like a describe to say like the method name and then have a single or multiple its inside it. Because I don't use the output that shows me that. I just use the dot output.
Yeah, I do
But
too.
it does make it easier to parse a file quickly.
makes
but
it easier
it's
to
not-
write them too. Like I'm describing my method and then I'm like context when this happens, context when this happens. And it makes it easier to just like kind of walk through the logic as you write. I wrote minitest for years and years. Podia was the first company I ever wrote RSpec at. I am not going back to minitest. there's a bunch of RSpec patterns that I don't like and don't agree with. I don't like the abstraction of like stuff into these shared examples. I very much dislike that.
I just think RSpec is such a slippery slope as a way to write bad test. As someone who's spent years writing bad test, and I'll go as far to say, I think dry and test is an anti-pattern.
I don't think I disagree.
Yeah, I feel that way.
You could just define variables in the spec. Like that's fine with me too.
I shared some setup the other day because it was literally the same. And I just used instance variables and it was fine.
I don't share things like that. I always rewrite it.
This is the like 1% of the tests I've written in the last 6 months. It's just a before block is all it is.
I'll do that with an instance variable where it's like this entire test file needs a subscribed customer. And why not do that? But then you also get the benefit of just using Ruby in there. So you're like, set the instance variable, but I can add an adder reader as well and make it read like a local variable or do any like the regular Ruby kind of stuff in there, like adding helper methods to generate subscription with different options at the bottom of your file and a private method. It's just writing regular old Ruby code, which is what I really like about minitest.
That's what Nate used to say to me over and over again when he was like trying to convince me that we were actually doing the right thing by writing minitests, which I would later learn was wrong. But
I've never heard you say Nate is wrong. I am stunned right now.
I'm not even willing to say that actually because I think I learned a lot about testing from doing that with him. Yeah, I am actually going to cower on that. And to be honest, I would totally write minitests if he wanted me to write it again.
Oh, here
Not
we
you,
go.
Though. Not you, though.
Yeah, now he's backpedaling.
Yeah.
This bicycle goes backwards pretty fast.
I will not do fixtures. Hands down.
That's fine. Fixtures,
They've caused me great grief.
It took me a long time to figure out how to use them.
It's so easy to misuse them too.
It's so easy to misuse them. It's so easy to misuse FactoryBot.
Yeah. Sure, but I feel like screwing up your fixtures is way harder to unscrew.
The fixtures are good for simpler stuff, but once you get into like, I need an account with 7 users and 1 person subscribed, and we've got like 12 other associated records we need to run this one test. Good luck doing with that in fixtures with multiple types of those things. It becomes really hard, at least with FactoryBot. Like you can define all that in one grouping. Instead, you've got to match the names across 12 different YAML files of fixtures, which can be a nightmare. The only thing that I really, really like fixtures for is like basic examples of like a subscribed user. That's set up. All of our tests can go use that unless they need a special case. Even then, they can do a special case where they grab the subscribed user and then like change it to their subscription just expired and make like a little update to that fixture just for the one test. Instead of having to generate all those from scratch for that test, it's faster just to grab that whole chunk of data, make your little edits for that context or whatever you have in your test that you're trying to do. I really like that, where it's just like we reach for the one thing as much as possible, because I've noticed that with FactoryBot, I had a tendency, and other people did, of like creating different factories for every single case. And then you end up with a nightmare of tons of different factories. And you're like, we only use this one for one test. And it's like, we could have just reused the other one and modified it just slightly during the test or whatever. And that would have been better and cleaner and simpler.
I'm using fixtures exclusively. And there have been a couple of times that it's caused some like, wait, what's missing here? Like the example you gave of like a lie setup data, but it hasn't failed me yet. And I'm stunned because I've tried for years to use fixtures properly and could never get there. What I just started doing.
You're all grown up now.
But do you think you could do that at Podia?
No, I think we're too far gone at Podia to adopt.
But no. Or let me rephrase then. If you could magically poof away the amount of work it would take us to get there, do you think we could still use fixtures with the size of the application, the size of the test suite that we have?
I think we could, with the caveat.
It has a scaling problem.
I don't know the cost of inserting that many records in transaction, like every time for every test, because it would be a ton of fixtures.
You can just roll them back. It doesn't have to like reinsert all.
If you're worried about the mental overhead.
Yeah, screw the database.
Well, I know that's how you feel because you want to use Mongo. I think it comes down.
Yo, that's a lie.
I think it comes down to
Couch DB.
Now that I'm into.
deep cut. I think it comes down to like I had to get some discipline in how I wrote the fixtures. Because like it is easy to make a mess, but I'm really strict on my naming. Like I've come up with my own naming conventions.
And that will work, but with it,
But
when
it's hard to then document that for the team.
Yeah. That's what I
pretty
meant
easy
from
to follow.
scaling problem of like.
You
it's-
don't allow a PR with fixture changes unless Jason's touched it.
Yeah, you add in a
that's-
danger rule.
You know,
Yeah,
I will say the absolute worst thing about fixtures, though, when you make a typo, like on an association name, it doesn't tell you which fixture had the problem or anything like that. Because it's
like
like
a SQL
one
error.
big insert. And it's like,
Fun.
okay, where do I even begin to debug this? That's like the biggest issue with that. And maybe there just needs to be like a test, like DB fixtures load command. We need like a debug version
Validate.
of that like inserts a 1x1 or something that could validate it and tell you like this line in the YAML file is the issue. Because if we could get that, fixtures would be a million times easier to debug, because that, from my experience of watching people use fixtures, they're just like, I don't know, none of the fixtures work now, so I'm going to switch to FactoryBot or whatever, because it's just darn near impossible to debug.
So you need a freaking like YAML LSP to do it.
Here's what I realized I hated about fixtures is I don't like writing YAML. That is one thing I remembered that I just don't like.
If you
But
switch to mise, you can use TOML.
I'm in. I mean, I use FactoryBot at Podia, and I cut my teeth on RSpec on FactoryBot. That's all I've used at any job I've ever had. So like, I don't mind using those tools. I'm just trying to like get to where I don't. Nobody, except for maybe like Jason Sweat, likes writing tests, and so I want to enjoy it again.
Before we wrap up, I know we're short on time. Have you tried Oaken from Casper, which is kind of a blend of fixtures and FactoryBot?
Fabricator is the one I've used in the past that
We
was
use
like not
Fabricator.
FactoryBot, but not fixtures.
Yeah.
We used
Um,
Fabricator at my last job.
I liked it.
You might check out Oaken, which is basically his blend of fixtures and FactoryBot and Fabricator. So you can use like the fixtures name, but also call create and give it a name and then like override things. His example here is like users.create Casper. Then you can override attributes when
On
you
the
pull out
fly.
that fixture and stuff on the fly. So you
That's-
get kind of the benefit of both, which is kind of what I was alluding to.
Be nice.
What I'm doing is pulling out a fixture and then editing the records in the beginning of my tests. But he can do that basically all in a one-liner with Oaken, because it's added this little extra syntax for that, which is pretty sweet. They go under DB seeds, so it generates fixtures like that.
All right. Well, good chat, boys, and we'll do it again next week.
Bye.
All right.
CouchDB for life.